In this video, I'm going to introduce you to another type of loop slash repeat or iterate called the FOREACH loop, and it's spelled as one word. The words for each or FOREACH, but it's really for each. And this is a more advanced type of loop than what we've looked at in the past. The FOREACH loop, it loops through a whole collection of objects. Now, what a collection is it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a collection of objects. There are multiple mechanisms that C# makes available for dealing with collections of objects. I'm going to do this demonstration using what's called generics. What a generic is it's a collection of one specific type of object. So you can have a collection of just address objects. If you try to add a string or a null, well, not a null, but if you try to add an object that is not an address, it will throw an exception and say, hey, you know what, you're trying to put a type in here that is not allowed. Addresses only. So to use the generic collections, you're going to come up here and you're going to say using system.collections.generic. Now what this statement does is there's multiple libraries of resources available in the C# library or in the C# language, but by default you don't have all of those available because the library is just phenomenally huge. So for more specific and specialized features of the .NET language, sometimes you've got to specify that, hey, I want to use generics in this code. Once you've done that, once you've done this, then you can use generics. So we're bringing it in. So now let's have a look at some generic types. So we have a list. A list is one particular type, and so we're going to say a list of address objects. So this is a collection of address objects, and we're going to call this address list. So we'll say new list address. So if this syntax is confusing, this is our type. It's a list of addresses. This is our variable name, and this is, we're specifying that we're going to create a new list. So address list is just a collection of nothing but address objects. You cannot add anything but an address to it. If you try to, it will give you an error. So now that we have a list of addresses, we want to add some addresses to that. So we already have a pretty good routine on how to populate an address. So we can reuse this code and create individual addresses. So first of all, let's say we can do this in a while loop. So we'll have a console statement. Let's say console right line, would you like to add an address? And let's actually just make that a right, and then we'll say string add equals console.readline. And for good form, I'm going to trim it to make sure that there's no spaces, and I'm also going to convert it to uppercase. So now if somebody enters AY, it will automatically trim any spaces and capitalize it. And so we'll give the user a hint here so they'll know what we expect, yes or no. But really we're just going to check for the Y. Anything that's not a Y is going to be considered to be a no. So now we can put these into a while loop. So we can say while add is equivalent to capital Y. And it's capital Y because no matter what they enter, lower or uppercase, it's going to convert it to uppercase. So while that equals y, we are going to populate an address. Now, in order to make this work, we need to have an address object and a new one every single time. So this is going to require some trickery. What we're going to do first is declare an address object variable. If you've seen the previous video where I talked about the variable declarations, we're going to do half of a declaration. So we're going to have an address object called, well, address object, but we're not going to assign it anything as of yet. We're just going to say we have a variable called address. It's going to store an address. We're not ready to put anything in that variable yet, and that's because we want that to only get populated within this loop. So within the loop, we'll say address object is a new object, or sorry, new address, and then it's going to get populated. And then at the very end of the loop, we are going to add this object to the address list. So we'll say address list, add address object. Oops. So, and then we will ask, would you like to add another address? Would you like to add another address? Yes or no? And then we will get add again. So this will let us repeat and enter, repeatedly create address objects and add them to a collection. And then once we're done, what we're going to do, and this is the purpose of the for each loop, we're going to go through and print them one at a time on the screen. So we'll do the for each loop in just a second. Let's run this and let's make sure that it builds and runs exactly like I wanted to. Uh-oh. Right. So we'll just get rid of this. And let's run. Would you like to add an address? And if we say no, that should exit the program. And it does. Ooh, and something happened and the program closed. This is part of Linux. If something fails in the program, it just closes. It doesn't sit there and search for a solution or waste your time. It just closes, and then you can bring the program back up. So let's come back here. So yes, this is where we were. So would you like to add an address? So a second ago we said no. Now let's say yes. So now we say, what is your name? Billy. Address is 123 Fake Street, Suite 345. City is my city. State is my state. Zip. Now notice it loops back again, or it hasn't looped yet, but right now we're saying, would you like to add another address? And this is where we are. So we'll set a couple of breakpoints. So we'll say, yes, I would like to add another address. And so it captured our y, and it's going to say, is this equal to y? And so now again we are repeating with the while loop. We've seen a while loop execute in a previous video. I'm going to do it just one more time so we can see it in action. So we'll say Billy and Bobby. We'll just say they're brothers at Fake Street, Suite 345. My city, my state, zip code 11111. And now we say nope. so we said no, and the program has exited. So now the final piece of the puzzle, and what I was wanting to demonstrate, the for each loop, now that we've actually seen that this while loop works and we can add addresses, we're going to come in and we're going to say for each. What this is going to do is this is going to loop through each address that we added to that list one at a time, and then let you do whatever you want to with that address. So we're going to call it for each address in address list. Well, or what was the name of our list? Address list. Now, we're going to say console dot right, oops, dot right line get formatted address. Now, a few things to note. Notice here that this is just a very short declaration of a variable. This lowercase address only exists within this loop, and it's a placeholder. So if you picture that there may be 3, 4, 5, 6, or 10 addresses in this address list, address only points to one at a time. So the first time the loop runs, it points to the first one. The second time it runs, it points to the second one, all the way until the address, every single address has been worked on. And so one at a time, it is going to print the addresses to the screen. So let's go ahead and run it and see how that looks. And we'll set a breakpoint there for whenever we get to the point. So would you like to add an address? Say yes. What is your name? We'll say Billy. 123 Fake Street. Sweet. 456. They moved. My city. State is my state. Zip code is 11111. If you like, yes. So let's say Bobby. 123 Fake Street. Suite 345. Okay. Let's add a third one. Billy, Bobby. How about Gunther? The mighty Gunther. 123 Fake Street. Suite 456. City is my city. My state. And then 11111. Okay. So would you like to add another? No. And now we exit that loop. So we're done with the while loop because we said no. It did not match up to y. Now we're on the for each loop. So we have 3 addresses that we entered. And if we look in address list, you'll see that we have 3 in there. And you can see these. If we go, here we are. So in an earlier video you saw where I hid some variables and I used the underbar notation. The .NET framework uses that same one. So the list does not expose a property that lets you directly access the items, but you can see them here in the Expression Explorer. Now notice that we added 3 addresses, but notice there's a 4th in there that's null. And that's fine. So you can see we have Gunther was the last one, and then there's Bobby, and then the first one was Billy. So we have these 3 addresses. So what this loop is going to do now is it's going to iterate through each one. So for each of these address objects, we're going to pass it to get formatted address, and get formatted address is going to return a formatted string for the address, and we're going to write it to the console. So that was 1, and we do it again. Now if we look at the console, you'll see that so far we've written 2, and now it's about to write the last one. and it's done. Now the for each loop has a huge advantage. If you can really only use it if you know that you're going to perform an operation on every object in a collection. The other loops, the while loop, the for loops, those are calculation based. So you may not know how many times you need to iterate a code block when you use the while or the for loops, but a for each loop, you're guaranteed that it's going to iterate through everything in the collection. There are ways to exit a loop. That's a more complicated subject, but for now, that's what you need to know. So the while loop is used whenever you're not sure how many times you're going to need to perform something. The for loop means that you can calculate how many times you need to do something, but that calculation may change. The for each loop is for those instances where you know you have a collection of objects and you would like to do the exact same operation on everything in that collection. And those are all your loops in C#.